2, and it is 7 p.m. and we are so happy to be here with you this evening. We have a show that is dynamic and jam-packed with information and education regarding racial trauma. That is our topic tonight on Race Matters, racial trauma. And this is such an important topic because many people, especially people of color, are walking around daily with racial trauma experiences, and it's impacting how they go about life and they don't even really realize it. So we're going to break it down for you with some symptomology and some definitions and some experiences so you can assess yourself and see how you may have been impacted by racial discrimination and whether or not, that has impacted your life to such a degree where maybe you need to seek counseling or seek therapy. And since I'm there, I'm going to say this: the information that we share is simply information and education. Mariana and I are therapists, but we are not your therapists, so we are not giving anyone any specific information that's going to help them individually. You need to seek individual help if you feel as though some of the things that we are saying you want to look further into. This is strictly information and education. So just wanted to share that with you. I'm hearing a little feedback and I'm not sure why. Are other people hearing that?
I don't hear it.
I hear it.
Yeah, you do? Okay. I'm not tech savvy, so I don't know. So audience, you just have to kind of bear with us. I don't know. So Race Matters. I'm Sharon Thomas. I am one of the hosts of Race Matters, CEO and president of Full Life Communications and producer of all the shows on this Full Life Communications network. Thank you for watching on Facebook and YouTube. We are simulcasting, and all the shows simulcast on Facebook and YouTube on the Full Life Communications channel and page. So please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Like the page on Facebook, share the feed, comment, and put your questions and comments in the feed. One thing, if you watch it from someone else's page because they've shared it, and please do share, and you write questions on their page, then I can't see the questions and comments and to be able to comment. So for instance, if Mariana would, or Rosie share the feed, which they normally do, and you watch it from their page, which is great, they'll be able to look at their cell phone and see your comment, but I can't see it in the feed for the Facebook and the YouTube feed. You have to go to Full Life Communications on YouTube or Facebook in order for me to be able to see your question or comment and highlight it on the screen. Full Life Communications on Facebook and YouTube. So again, subscribe, share, click the notification bell, and like the video. And we're talking about racial trauma tonight. So I'm going to let the other hosts introduce themselves, and then we're going to get right into the topic. Rosie, what about you? Who is Rosalina Anderson?
Rosalina Anderson is a young lady that grew up in Camden. My father's Puerto Rican, my mother is Black. And my experiences come from life that I lived, the job that I had, the experiences in school, high school, just experiences in our family, the experiences on our street. So I met Sharon, guys. I met Sharon just a little bit at the church we go to, Freshword Ministries, and we love our pastor over there. And that's how I met her. And it was interesting because she asked me to join her on a different webcast that she was doing with another gentleman, and we were more talking about politics and different political things going on, and race matters, dealing with the political aspect of it. And I just had so much fun. That when she said she was doing this and wanted me to join her, and it's another young lady that does join us, but she's away right now. But I said, yeah, because I just was interested. And I was like, I was nervous because I don't have their background that they have. But as Mariana had told me on the last show we had, your life experience, it really says a lot to the show too. That you don't need degrees. Sometimes the best degrees are life experiences.
Yes.
So and I received that. And it was like, it made me feel more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Here, so I'm gonna throw it over to that young lady that helped me with that information. Mariana, you can take it away, hon.
Yeah, I truly meant that.
Yeah.
I still have so much to learn from all of you. Plus, like, degrees sometimes just mean a lot of money to pay back.
Isn't that the truth?
Oh man.
I'm actively avoiding looking at how much I owe back for all of that.
It's traumatizing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's traumatizing. Okay.
And I mean, this part is relevant education
Mhm.
because that was the context
Yeah.
of how Sharon and I met, being, on a program together, a marriage and family program. So that kind of also speaks to like the reason, the conversation about trauma and racial trauma is very important to me. And actually, I think so. A little bit more about myself before I share how we met. But I'm from Moldova, near Ukraine. Came here as a teenager at the age of 14 without speaking any English. I was actually closer to 15, I think a week or two away from being 15. Having had the experience of not being from here, means a different experience, right? Which sometimes has helped to like seek other perspectives and voices as well, other than the dominant voice here. But so Sharon and I actually did a project together that had to do with race and trauma as well. Remember that,
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think it was Race in America during Trump's administration,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and along with two other classmates, Shamir and who else was in our
Yes.
group?
Yes. Yes. I just
Yeah,
talked to her not too long ago. I keep
a
flaking
shout
for
out
her
to the
name.
ladies. What's that?
Yes. Erica.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Yeah, I actually just talked to Erica this week. So
I know. I'm just like, why am I not remembering her name?
yeah, it was one of those like it was right here, right here. So we all did a little bit of just like research on this topic, and I think it was through that experience that I got to know Sharon more. So then when she did the show, she invited me to become part of it, and here I am. But when it comes to trauma, so of course, today I'll be sharing a little bit of what I learned in an academic context, when it comes to race, but more so on the trauma side. I have had quite a bit of training. So in my master's program, my concentration was in trauma. And then I didn't finish, but I had started a trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy approach and had done, very trauma-specific treatments with like several clients in my practice.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much, Rosie and Mariana, for introducing yourselves and sharing some background information. So, as I said, we are talking about racial trauma tonight, and going to give you some definitions of racial trauma and complex trauma, and also, too, some symptoms of PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, which many of you are familiar with, but you might not be as familiar with complex trauma, which is what Mariana is going to talk about, and how complex trauma really is affects us probably to a greater degree than we really realize, more than so PTSD. So having that education will help people of color to understand how they are operating with trauma that they have experienced, and some directly and some indirectly, in such subtle nuances that we may not even be aware that this is a trauma response that we're having. So that's why I'm hoping that this education will be helpful. We're hoping that this education will be helpful for everyone watching to help understand ourselves better. So, one, racial trauma, and I'm going to read the definition so I can make sure I get it correct. And so Sheila Wise Rowe defines in her book, defines racial trauma as physical and psychological symptoms that people of color often experience after a stressful racial incident. Okay, so that's a broad definition, and that gives you some insight, physiological, psychological. Now, complextrauma.org puts a little bit more meat on the bone, so I want to read that definition as well, so you can maybe have a little more insight. So, complextrauma.org describes racial trauma, said it involves the experience of danger related to both past and ongoing prejudicial treatment, including physical violence, threat of harm, shaming interactions, and ongoing vicarious trauma, which is indirect trauma, due to witnessing harm to other Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So that put a little more meat on the bones with that definition, but I wanted to give you both so you can get an idea of what that, what that definition is. And because we throw around, in the lay community, we throw around psych terms, but really don't really know the definition behind them. And trauma is one of those words that's thrown around in society, but do people really know what trauma really is? So those are the definitions of racial trauma. Those are two of the definitions of racial trauma. Now, with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm just going to go through some of the symptoms and not in detail, because if I go in detail, then this would be a class, and this is not a class. So
we're avoiding classes now, right?
I know, right?
We love our program.
Exactly. So I'm not really trying to be in class right now, right? So with PTSD, again, just some of the symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder. So right off the bat, this says post, which means after an incident, an event that has happened. Now, some of the things with racial trauma, it's not always post, because racial trauma can be ongoing, but it's not like racial discrimination has stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So, but maybe there is a specific incident where you may have developed, and you have to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or counselor to get diagnosed. We're not diagnosing anyone, just talking about symptoms. But if there was a specific event where then maybe some of these symptoms you may have had, then maybe there's a PTSD diagnosis, but also too, this still doesn't mean you're not going through some ongoing racial challenges, racial trauma that may or may not meet the definition of a post-traumatic event. And I hope I'm explaining that so you all can understand me. So some of the symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and this doesn't have to just do with race. This is just post-traumatic stress disorder, any stressful event that causes these symptoms, and racial trauma could be one of those types of events. Distressing memories of the event, distressing dreams, flashbacks, physical reactions, internal or external physical reactions that are associated with the cues associated with the event, and avoiding people, places, and things that remind you of the event, negative thoughts, negative mood. Also, too, there's some irritability that can come out in the form of aggression, right? And sometimes, I think we were Mariana and Rosie and I, when we were talking about the show, talk about the angry Black woman, and just labeling people when we don't really know what's going on behind in that person's psychology. So some of the reason, for the angry Black woman is because of what Black women experience gender-wise as well as race-wise. So, and then of course a myriad of other circumstances. So it's not just people just want to be angry. There's reasons behind being angry. Now, yes, that person needs to get some help, but let's just stop labeling people because of what we see their outward behavior is. Because when we see that outward behavior, there's something going on behind that that's contributing to why that person is behaving that way, whether they even know it or not. But I'm here to say that there is. Okay, so irritability that may take the form of aggression and anger, memory issues associated with the event, like might not be able to remember certain aspects of the traumatic event, and negative emotional states such as fear, horror, anger, guilt, and shame. And those are just some of the symptoms of PTSD that people have, no matter what the traumatic event is, whether it's racial trauma, whether it's being in the military, being in a war event, witnessing a crime, being a victim of a crime, any sort of, being a natural disaster, any sort of traumatic event. It's possible to have these symptoms. Now, everybody that experiences a traumatic event doesn't have PTSD, but people can develop that as well as some other type of stress-related disorders. But right now we're talking about trauma. So now I'm going to let Mariana talk about complex trauma. I defined racial trauma, and she's going to define complex trauma and give some information about complex trauma, which is more in depth than post-traumatic stress disorder. But she'll explain that. Mariana?
Hmm. Yeah, so we have PTSD, which, we usually PTSD will start with a stressor, right, an event. However, at the same time, we understand, right, that it's not necessarily just event, because as Sharon said, sometimes people go through the same event, and some people would experience PTSD and others don't. And that's because, with trauma, there's a level of subjective interpretation of the event as well, based on like our own previous histories, our ability to cope, other experiences we might have had in the past, the support we might receive immediately afterwards. So when we think of trauma, there's the event, which, there's a few things that most of us professionals, but I think most people can see, okay, this experience will probably be traumatic, right? Things like war, violence, sexual abuse, and so on. Most of us can look at that and see, like, yes, I think this could be a traumatic experience. And sometimes we may say, like, how about this, like, lesser, like for me, maybe this wouldn't be as traumatic, but how come this person has the symptoms? And that's because, with a traumatic experience, you often also has to do with the interpretation of the person experiencing those events. So we have PTSD in that way, that's the one we often hear about, right? Even in the news, because it's been popularized. A lot of it was based on combat experiences, but we know now that it's more broader than that. And then more recently, in academic settings, we start to talk about complex trauma, right? And actually, there was quite a bit of debate before this newest manual on the DSM, which is the manual with mental health disorders that's being predominantly used here in the States. So the DSM has PTSD, but not complex trauma. And complex trauma was part of the conversations to be added. And basically what it is, we start to realize that sometimes people may not experience the exact symptoms that Sharon was describing, right? Such as, necessarily always avoidance or intrusions and flashbacks and all those sorts of things. And yet there definitely was a trauma history, and it was actually deeper than PTSD, and this is where the idea of complex trauma came to be. So complex trauma focuses on the experiences that are pervasive, right? So we can see how one experience could be really stressful, and then what does it do for a human being when they're not experiencing that thing just one time, but on and on and on and on. And then what happens when that doesn't start during adulthood, but it starts in childhood, right? So a child is experiencing, being born to a single parent, right? And then that parent is killed. And then they go into foster care. And then in foster care, they become attached to the first family, but then that family is really not allowed to continue, right? So now they're experiencing another major loss. And then they go into another foster care and they go through domestic violence. And then they go into another one and they experience sexual abuse. Like, these are many, many experiences of stressors, right? And because it happens at a vulnerable age in childhood, it tends to lead to more challenging consequences for these individuals. So along with that, I think we were starting to even relate, the experiences of people of color who experience racial trauma in the United States to complex trauma, right? Because of how pervasive a lot of the traumatic experiences can be, starting with a very, very young age.
And then generationally, we can take it back for African Americans, from slavery to present day, and bring it all the way forward with there's so many things that we all know, throughout
Mhm.
history that we can point to that have contributed to
Absolutely.
incidents of racial
Mhm.
discrimination, prejudice, trauma that is called
Yeah.
trauma, and
Mhm.
ones that are not so egregious, let's say, the microaggressions, those smaller things that are done to us, particularly on a daily basis, right? Because we
Right.
don't see those slight,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that people
Yeah.
don't even recognize as causing trauma, right?
Right. And the other component of complex trauma is also like this relational piece, often
Mm-hmm.
coming from caregivers or other significant people in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anything related to racial trauma is relational in nature, right?
Right.
Because if
And a
you think
lot.
of PTSD as a potential, like even a natural disaster can cause PTSD, right? And
Right.
you deal with that. But how do you deal when the trauma is created by another human being?
Right, exactly. And those learned behaviors that we have that we carry on, and so even within our own community, right,
Yeah.
within
Mm,
our own family,
Mhm.
because we've been traumatized and we perpetrate that trauma unknowingly, right, onto those who we love because we don't understand how it works.
Mhm.
mhm.
You
And
know?
sometimes that comes maybe through certain, parenting strategies, but there's also genetics that are being passed down,
Mm-hmm.
right? We were
Yes.
talking about the chronic experiences of going through stress. Um, One of my sisters likes, because of her, field career and such, she always likes to talk about how our body heals in a state of relaxation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you always have to look where the next danger is coming from, right?
Mhm.
When
Right.
is it when is it that people of color can sit and relax and experience healing?
Right,
That's
because
so
you're always waiting for the next thing to happen.
Mhm.
So you live on walking on eggshells. You live in a constant state of anxiety,
mhm,
right? And just wait because we know that there's something else coming
Yeah.
because
mhm,
we just know where we live. So,
mhm,
this is kind of a natural state of being.
Mhm.
We
mhm,
live prepared, even though when it actually happens, you're not really prepared. But
Mhm.
but but we live on that edge of there's some.
mhm,
I'm going to turn on the news and there's some police brutality any given moment.
mhm. Whereas as Rosie shared last week, right? I'm showing up to my job like every other day, about to fix something, and then the owner of the house opens the door, sees your skin color, and shuts the door in your face.
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
how do you prepare for moments like that, right?
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes you're not even prepared because, like, even if you experience certain type of racial situations, that wasn't. I wasn't prepared for that. That
Mm-hmm.
it floored me, and then to go in front of the house, sit at a pedestal, call in to let the what we called at that time the desk know
Mhm.
that I was there and the customer was refusing access, and to have the desk clerk saying, "Guess what? She's calling in right now on the red phone saying that you refuse to go in and fix the phones." I said, "I'm sitting in front of her door right now." And they said, the technician is not refusing to come in. She's right there. She's willing to come in and check it out. And she refused, you know. So
Right.
these are the things. I mean, even when you all did talk about PTSD, some of us don't even understand. And if I'm, parsing this wrong, then you two ladies can correct me. But even as a Black woman, as a Black person, soon as I hear sirens going off in back of my car, my heart starts palpitating and I start getting panicky feeling. I'm not doing nothing wrong. I'm just driving the car.
Right.
But all of a sudden, oh my God, are you stopping me? What am I, did I do something wrong? So automatically you start reacting to the fact that the cop just turned on the siren in behind you and you might pull over and they drive right past you. But it's the fact that, oh my God, they won't
Yeah.
pull me over because I've been pulled over more than once and even asked, whose car is this? It's my car.
Right.
Well,
Right.
what year is it? This is what the questions was asked to me. Well, what is it? It's a Bonneville. What year? A 2000. Are you sure? And I was like, you have the registration and insurance in your hand. Look at it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But even in that, I still had to temper my attitude because that could have gone anywhere.
Right.
Soon as he would see an overly aggressive black female, we've seen where black females were pulled out the car, slammed to the ground. Just like,
Yes.
what are you doing? Why are you saying that? I didn't do anything wrong. So, I guess we were lucky that we were questioned and then let go. But right then, I'm like, okay. And I'm looking at the people that are in the car with me, and I'm like, we're being profiled right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We stole a Pontiac Bonneville, nice car. I love my car.
Right. Right.
But I'm like, I'm being profiled because I'm not driving a hoopty.
Yeah.
And then if I was driving a hoopty, I probably would have got pulled over and said, this car is in bad shape. It's got a bad headlight. Here's 15 tickets. So I can't drive a good car, but then I couldn't probably drive a bad car either.
Because it was driving while black. It had nothing to do with the car.
DWB.
Right?
DWB.
Right. Exactly. I have, you mentioned that, and it reminded me, and I'm going to try to keep this brief. But after George Floyd's murder, May 2020, and people were protesting across the country, across the world, and I went to, this is in South Jersey, I went to a store to pick up something, a drugstore, and I was sitting in the parking lot right before, went into the store, and I heard these police sirens, in the background, so we're coming close, and I had an anxiety attack.
Yeah.
This was in the thick of when people were protesting, right? And I was just like, in the moment, like, oh my God, like, are they coming to get me? What did I do? That this is irrational. I'm scared. I have done nothing, right? And I, had to do my deep breathing because this is what I tell my clients to do. And I have to do it myself because I'm experiencing an anxiety attack in this moment because I'm thinking, and this is the vicarious, right? Yes. Indirect trauma from witnessing. I don't know George Floyd, but I saw the video many times of his murder, and so I had to sit there and like gather myself. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, it subsided. And then right before I got ready to get out of the car, another siren, came because they were going wherever they were going. And it happened again. I was just so overwhelmed. Yeah. I just had to sit. I think I sat there for 45 minutes before I went in the store. So then I went in the store. And I can't remember because it was a while ago now, how it went down, but people were telling me that there was some protests going on, like in a town or two over. And that's where the police were going just to keep order. Not that there was anything shooting or anything. They were going to keep order. And, but, it's real.
But
it's real. I mean, the only time I might feel anxiety if I hear sirens is if I'm really speeding, right? And the cop is right behind me. And I'm like, and it's more like, I don't want to pay a ticket, but outside of that, right?
And that's the difference, Mariana. See, you knew, and you knew you were probably doing something wrong. You were going too fast. You probably didn't completely stop at a stop sign, and you heard the sirens, and oh crap, they got me. Whereas with us, it's like, oh crap, pull over. And your hands are ready to go up, and you don't want to hang them out the door, and it's like. Even when we had that situation with the gentleman that lived in Mount Laurel that was racially arguing with this black guy and stuff, and he was like, my address is below. Well, I went over there too. Me and my cousin. My cousin said, Rose, I'm going. I said, well, pick me up. I'll meet you out there, whatever. But the part that bothered me the most was that after they arrested the gentleman, and the people, all of us started to slowly, because, when you get a gathering like that, everybody starts talking to each other and stuff. And, you just start talking about the situation. This guy was crazy. But then all of a sudden, once they pulled off with the gentleman in the car to take him to a safe place, I don't say to jail, to a safe spot. All of a sudden, when we turned around, there were riot police standing there. Mind you, it was going on all day long. Nothing happened. Nobody did any breaking windows. Nothing happened. But as soon as they got him out of Dodge, when we turned around, there were riot police walking toward us. And it's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You had no problem with this man doing what he did. Now the cop cussing the cop out, telling the cop, you better know who you talking to. You don't know. Telling the police officer that morning when he gave it to, telling the police officer off. That officer not even pinning him down, not even calling for backup. And well, John, just go on. Yeah. And that's how the cop is talking to him. Yeah, we're just standing there. As soon as they pull off, riot police is lined up. And I looked at my cousin. I said, cuz, it's time to go. Time to go, because we don't want to be caught up in some foolishness up in here.
So even that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was it that you were afraid?
Oh, honey, listen, we just knew that the tear gas cans was going to be coming soon. I mean, see, you see in your mind the things that you saw on all of the news channels when all of the riots happened. And I mean, not riots, when the marches were happening, how the riot police came and just completely turned it into a mass like attack and on the Black Lives Matter people. So immediately when you see them, you immediately have flashbacks of what you've already seen, and you don't want to be caught up in that.
Right. And when we talk even now about, because so when it comes to like vicarious trauma, like DSM often uses more like in person, that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, since COVID, everything we've been doing has been like that, right? Telehealth. We met in person just once, right?
Yes. Yes.
And in some ways, like I feel like I've known you for so long because of how many times we've met on video, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we're connecting these days. And we're always like on our devices. And guess what? The devices are also like now where the TV is sitting there and you're sitting on the couch and you're just seeing this once in a while.
Right.
You're always reading, and like they're this close to us, right? So they're like in like I think this resembles the physical closeness to how emotionally connected we can feel to a lot of the stories we see now, right? So when you see George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everything else, like these become people personally, right?
Right.
I don't think our brain can tell the difference of like, oh, I just like read a lot about the stories, but I never met them.
We have a comment from Tammy. I'm going to highlight her comment. And if one of you could read it, that would be awesome.
I was actually going to say we have a...
okay, go ahead, Rosie.
Okay, so Tammy says, I didn't realize how bad my anxiety was towards police until one drove behind us in Ghana. I started to freak out, and I remember just breathing, letting the guard down, feeling at peace. It was surreal to not have to worry about the police, like seriously, She said, she also said, great show, guys. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Tammy.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing. I was freaking out in the car. That's a good term, Tammy. I was freaking out like, oh my God, what's about to happen? Like I did something wrong. And I hadn't. I was just sitting there waiting to go in the store. But the trigger of the sirens, and that means the police are coming to do something. And, as a person of color, as a Black woman in America, it's like, that means something bad is about to happen, and it could possibly happen to me. And then, the thoughts become irrational, when your emotions are high like that. And it's just like, oh my God, I haven't done anything.
Yeah.
But again, it's the irrational thing of the moment with the trauma. I'm sorry, Rosie, you were going to say something?
No, sorry, I thought you were pausing there for a moment. No, I was just wondering, so she's experiencing this as a person of color in Ghana, and she's able, because she's not here, she's there, she's able to calm down a lot faster. A lot faster than she would have been able to calm down if she was in the States.
Right. She was able to calm herself down because she remembered where she was.
Right.
But
and the trauma has already set in. That's why she freaked out.
You hear sirens, you see lights, they're after me. It's just, and I think the one time that it surprised me was when I'm now hearing that feedback just then, Sharon. But the one time that it surprised me and got me a little upset was when I was driving my utility truck. And it was on a Sunday morning, like at 8:30 in the morning. And I stopped at a light. It was a red light. When the light turned green, I turned the corner and the cop was behind me and turned the sirens on. Now, he pulled me over, not because I did anything wrong, but because the sticker on the license plate was expired. I don't check that stuff. I drive the utility truck. I go and repair phone lines. That's the guy that works on our trucks and does the work on our trucks is supposed to check that periodically and stuff and keep that up to date. But his reaction to me, like, it was like, did you know this is and I'm like, whoa, and my innocent mind at that time was thinking, I'm in a utility truck, so he's not going to treat me like he would as if I was in my personal car. No, he treated me worse. Yelling at me, telling me I should make you leave this truck here. Guess what? I shut the truck off and I started to get out. What are you doing? I said, I'm leaving the truck here. You said you don't want me driving. That's not what I'm saying. You take this truck back to the garage. And I mean, he was freaking out on me. And I felt like saying, of course, being a person of color, we have to watch what we say, because I knew that it would have gotten me straight to the ground after that. But I wanted to say, I don't know what happened between you and your wife yesterday, but don't take it out on me this morning. That's what I wanted.
I'm glad you didn't say that, Rosie.
I was right there. I was chewing that tongue like it was a piece of beef.
So in cases like that, from now on, this is, that much more known. Yeah. Is it possible, like, from, just to ask for their names and then, like, write reports?
Yeah, but you know what, Mariana, and I hear what you say.
And I'm not saying you should have done that in the moment.
No, but listen to what I'm going to say here. And this is to let us know how race matters situations are. A white person would do that, not a black person. They ain't even got the guts to say, what's your badge number, until today. Nowadays, you're seeing it because they are keeping track of what these cops that are out of control are doing. But
because people are videotaping it, we have proof now too. All I did was ask for your badge and ask for your name, which I have a right to do, right?
But that wouldn't even be a question in your head, let alone come out your mouth. All you want to do, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll take the truck right back to the garage. And that's how you feel. You get in that panic mode and you get almost into a master type of situation. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. Because that's how they tell you as a black person in America, that's how you are to talk to police officers, forgetting the fact that that's a person with an attitude.
Right.
That is just wearing a uniform and using his badge and gun to usurp his authority over you. But you would have to be white to be able to say, who do you think you're talking to? You don't talk to me that way. What is your badge number? Call your captain. Get your sergeant.
And we've seen people of color who have acted like that.
Yeah.
And the repercussions of that. Right.
So that thought would have never entered my mind. Today I might take that chance, but it's still, I might take that chance, hoping that I'm not on the ground when I ask.
I think the thought enters our mind. We just don't go there. Right?
Because we see the ramifications differently. Yeah. We see us on the ground, face bleeding,
and possibly not even making it out alive. That's the thing.
Yeah.
People get killed innocently in police brutality situations a lot of times. Not all the time, but often, this is what we see. It's like, I want to make it home tonight, with the least damage possible, least injuries possible. And
I don't want to have to call a bail officer for nothing.
So, ladies, let's segue, because, we could talk about this all day long. Yes. And we're just really scratching the surface, talking about this and with some examples. But let's talk about, because we want to give people hope, right? And it's not always doom and gloom. And so let's talk about resiliency. Let's talk about hope. Let's talk about faith, and how we, and especially how African Americans, with some of the examples, especially, Rosie, you and I have given, how we're able to persevere, through all of these years that we have persevered, through all we've been through. Where does that come from? How do we do that? So one of the things I want to read a definition of, again, from Ms. Rowe, it's racism and being resilient. Resiliency is one of the aspects of people of color, and say specifically African Americans, with what we've been through. We're a very resilient people. Well, resiliency as it relates to racism is described as the ability to persevere and maintain a positive sense of self when faced with omnipresent racial discrimination. Omnipresent means it's always present.
Right.
It's always there.
Mm-hmm.
But in the face of that, we persevere anyway. And we do.
Mm.
And so I'll just start it off. I believe it's God. Lord be our help. And we know back in slavery times, they were very faithful people, you know what I mean? And they
Yes.
prayed and they allowed their spirituality to get them through the hardest times in their lives. And I believe, as a Black community, we still do the same thing, our faith.
Mm-hmm.
We are believers, we love God, and we persevere. He gives us the strength, the fortitude, the grace, right, to persevere through these hard times.
Yeah.
So we have hope for a better future
Yeah.
because of our faith. And we need justice, because if we gave up, we would never see justice for our children and our children's children and so on and so forth. So we can't give up the fight. If the slaves gave up the fight, we wouldn't even be here to have this conversation.
Right. Right.
So that gives us the impetus to want to fight the good fight, so
Right.
we can make this a better land for us and our children and children's children and so on and so forth. So through our faith, right, and through our hope, and the fight for justice, we're resilient. But I believe ultimately God makes us resilient.
And I think also, as people of color, I know a lot of people see people of color might be like, they might see them angry and this and that because of what they've been through. But we have so much compassion in us.
Absolutely.
We can so quickly turn this script and talk to people and try and, treat people right regardless. And that too comes, like you said, Sharon, from the faith base that our country, our families have come through, knowing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, knowing that faith is a substance of things hoped for. So you have to have that faith in you that helps you to temper yourself, because it is so difficult when you see the foolishness of people and you want to respond. You would be so justified in responding, but guess what? That's not God. That's not the God part of you. So our compassion and our ability and desire to be kind to people and treat other people the way we would like to be treated, I think stands out big in our in our faith. So my cousin is on, Londi Marquez. She said, "Great show, guys." She said she loves the vibe. So
yes, thank you, Londia. And she watched our previous show too. She's a faithful watcher. Thank you, Londia.
Yes, she is. My cousin is.
Yeah, but actually, so along with that, Rosie, I was thinking, I actually have two thoughts. So earlier, Sharon, we were tying back, like you used the stereotype, right, of like, Black women, and tied that even back to racial trauma. And I think all of that is valid. But I agree with Rosie. From my experience, I've seen a lot more kindness and compassion from people of color, that I think even that in itself is a lie and a stereotype, and it's not truth.
Yeah.
And of course, you're going to see anger when there's injustice. So going back to responding from that, I think violence is where, it's important that we're able to work through some of that so we don't harm others. But anger in itself, I think God is okay with that anger. I think it makes God angry to see how people who are created in His image are being treated.
The Bible says, "Be angry, but sin not." So you can be angry, just don't go trying to kill everybody that made you angry.
Right. So
pull it in a little bit.
And all of our emotions are appropriate. It's how we handle them once we feel them that becomes the issue.
Right.
And also, Sharon, when we think of trauma, right, and the responses, right, we know that so there's fight and flight, freeze, and so on. We know now that actually most traumatic experiences happen during the freezing moment, because in those cases you realize you can't move either way, so you panic, and then a lot more gets stored in the body during a freezing moment. So actually fighting back, at least somewhat, I think is a fairly healthy response as a way of standing up for yourself and your loved ones. Again, right, we're not encouraging violence, but speaking up, right, being able to speak up and having allies who will do it, and hopefully even more, right? Because we know how that works, right? There is, sometimes people unfortunately wouldn't hear it from, maybe a person of color, but may hear it from another, white person getting angry about this and so on. Same thing happens with sexism, right? Sometimes men are more likely to reconsider their own, sexism when another man might bring it up, rather than, women might speak up. So all of that to say, anger is, I think, quite justified.
Right. Yes.
If anything, I think white people in America are lucky that Black people actually over and over again forgave and tried to make it a better, more, justified world.
Yes.
And sometimes it's amazing the amount of dedication you all still have and hope for this country despite so much that's happened, right?
Yes, I say the same thing, Mariana. If Black people weren't so forgiving,
Yeah.
and humble, and have such strong faith, look what we could do
Yep.
in a malicious,
Yeah.
and get back and say even justified, right? Anger,
Justified.
right? But that's not
Yeah.
the type of people that we are.
Right. My cousin Londi, she said we've had our own home KKK experience. I know how racism can be first. I think she meant firsthand or first thing she said, and she says the same thing. We need to pray, we need to pray because
Yes.
we all experience it. And you know what's so crazy? Like, if a person doesn't even look Black, once it's known that they are Black, or they see, or somebody sees the parent of that person that does not look Black, the attitude towards that person changes. They start treating you differently because now they realize, oh, you got Black family and stuff, and you got your mom's Black, and who's that? No way. And you when you experience those things firsthand, it's a shell shocker to some,
Right.
So.
Yeah. So when we talk about resiliency and all of these other areas, it's not necessarily to minimize the hurt that happens from, be it either like some, people of color might have symptoms of PTSD. In other cases, it might be more complex trauma, other experiences. But it's to hold the fact that like this stuff is very hurtful. And, we're having a few generations of this going on. And yet at the same time, there is hope, and we see it over and over and over again, right? And I know while we were preparing for this, we talked about, Black women in particular having, an intersectionality of oppression between, the racism and sexism that you experience. And yet some of the most kind and strong people, that I know are women of color. And now we have research that also even shows that, at this point, Black women are getting the most college degrees, which, like just sitting with that so women were not allowed to vote or go to school for a long time, right? And then you have the experiences of not being able to do a lot of that because of being a person of color. And now this is where Black women are. That just shows
resilience, like you said, resilience,
the strength,
a spirit of resiliency. And
and
not that like school is the only way, but we see in other ways. And the other thing we talked about was the humor, right?
Yes.
We could take a thing. We could
laugh through it all.
We could take a thing and flip it, and you will be crying. But it's a traumatic experience. But by the time we finish telling you the story, everybody, including us, are on the ground cracking up.
Right. We know how to make trauma funny.
Yeah.
Because we've had to. Again, life is so serious, so hard, so difficult and traumatizing. Living that day in and day out. Our mental and emotional health can take but so much, right? And even in the word, it talks about laughter being medicine for the soul.
It's the best medicine,
right? And so we, laughing through it, and not that it's a laughing matter, but we can laugh at things just to be healthy, right?
Mhm.
And as a part of our resiliency, to
Wow.
find humor in our everyday experience.
If you
Look,
don't mind,
your cousin is saying something again.
yeah, I wanted to read this, and it's blowing my mind that I'm reading it. My cousin said, she's had 2 jobs, and once they found out that her mother was Black, which is my aunt, my mom's sister, they stopped eating lunch with her, and the
Wow.
quality of oppression. She went downtown for that 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock for my to I guess to fight for her rights or something like that. 1
Hmm.
something clock for my rights. But I mean, it's like there
Yeah,
are no words. It's
yeah,
like I want to tell my cousin right now, invite me down there, show me the people that did it, and I'll take care of it for you.
right,
But the moment they found out her mom was Black, then they disassociated with her.
right,
Mm,
She wasn't good enough to eat. Yeah.
mm.
right. And
So
what
then,
sense does that make? She's the same person that you knew before you knew her mother was Black. You
Yeah.
know,
You liked her, you got along with her, you ate lunch with her, but
it's
then you saw her
senseless.
mother and you cut her off.
Right.
mm,
It's senseless.
just hire an
Yeah,
attorney.
that's what she was when she went downtown and hired an attorney. Yeah.
Good for
Mm,
you.
good for you. Yeah, and I guess I know we have to wrap up, but
Yes,
the final
yes.
thing that I wanted to say with some of the stuff is the pain that must come not only from experiencing some of that, but knowing that you have nieces and nephews, right, that go out in the world and you wonder like they're gonna experience moments like that, and I'm gonna find out later, and some may be like next week, but some may be a few years down the road about some of these things that they've experienced. That's gotta be really hard.
And that's why I think you see so much resilience with the Black females, because the mothers, the aunts, and stuff like that. I think we feel we have to be there to protect our babies, because nobody else is going to. So we have to make sure that we're there, so that when they come around, we can talk them down and try to help them understand what happened and that it's not their fault. So I think that's where the resilience and the compassion and the bounce back comes from, so that we can also do the same for anybody else, or any other ethnic race that is feeling feeling they're going through the same thing you're going through, or feeling that their family or their people are the ones causing it. We could tell them, listen, it's not your fault. Stop.
Mm,
Don't internalize that. Don't do that to yourself. It's not fair to you. Just because you're in a family that might have done certain things, that doesn't depict who you are. That's what happened, but that's not who you are. You
Exactly.
know?
Exactly. And on that note, Rosie and
Yes.
Mariana, we are going to close out the show. Like we said in the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, this is just a tip, and I mean the very tip of the iceberg, talking about racial trauma. It is so in depth. We could have, shows into infinity and still not do it total justice, because
Mhm.
there's so much meat on the bones, which is really why, if you think you have experienced racial trauma and it's affecting your activities of daily living to the extent where you're not functioning optimally, seek a therapist, your own individual therapist, or counselor, so you can work out some of those issues and learn how to manage. Because here's the thing, we can't control it, but we can manage it, and manage it better, and practice self-care. All of us practice forms of self-care every single day. Take 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. It doesn't have to be a whole dedicated hour. Just a few minutes. Do some deep breathing. Just do some relaxation. Put the phone down. Just sit quiet. Take a nap. Listen to some relaxing music or relaxation sounds. There's a whole myriad of things that you could do that you enjoy to practice self-care. And not just because of racial trauma, just because life is a struggle sometimes. And we need to take that break for ourselves. So that is our live show tonight on Race Matters, talking about racial trauma. Thank you for those who watched live. Thank you so much, Tammy and Landia, and those who are watching who didn't put your say anything on the chat. I see the numbers, but I can't see you. But we appreciate you watching anyway, and those who watch on the replay, we appreciate you as well, because the information is relevant no matter when you listen to it, morning, noon, or night. And so we appreciate you supporting the show and wanting to be a part of the Race Matters conversation, because this is a safe place to have the hard conversation. We love you. God bless you. Join
Love
us
you
next
guys.
Thursday for another live episode of Race Matters, Thursdays at 7 p.m.
Next
God bless you.
Thursday.
Shalom.
Love you guys. God bless you.
Bye.